Apple Silicon meet Windows Silicon. This is the MacBook Air, running on the M4 Apple Silicon ARM-based chip. This is the ASUS Zenbook A14, running on a Snapdragon X Plus, also an ARM-based chip, and this little lappy 5000 is running native Windows on ARM. Who even knew that was a thing? It's an arms race. How is no one using that term yet? This means that both Windows and Mac are on ARM chips now. And yes, they have been for years, but for real now. And ASUS is marketing their new Snapdragon laptops as MacBook competitors. So then, is this thing a MacBook killer? It's not, but it does have some things that I wish Apple would do. And I think this is the beginning of a new era for Windows laptops. Okay, so right out the gate, M4 from just a raw processing power standpoint, the M4 chip is a faster chip than the Snapdragon X Plus. There does exist a Snapdragon X Elite, which is closer to the M4, but still a bit weaker, and I don't have one of those, so we're gonna talk about this. The M4 is a 3nm process chip, where Snapdragon is still on the 4nm process. That means Apple's chip is gonna be more efficient because it'll have more transistors per millimeter. The M4 clock speed is at 4.5 GHz, where the Snapdragon X Plus is at 3.2. And all of that means that just on benchmarks, when we run like a Geekbench test, M4 beats Snapdragon in every category. But most of that doesn't matter, and that's not the whole story. These laptops, these ultra portables, aren't marketed towards 3D modelers who work at Pixar. These are not made for AAA gaming. Although with a pretty easy mod, the MacBook Air can play Cyberpunk, but that's a subject for another day. These are made for students. These are made for casual coffee shop Redditors and corporate drones like me. When I'm not doing video stuff, my other life consists of 2D AutoCAD and Microsoft 365 apps. I'm doing research on avoiding tariffs while ordering aluminum truss. I'm talking to AI about how to fix my St. Augustine grass. I use Outlook. I have Teams meetings. I make my super fancy spreadsheets for scheduling my crews, where I cut them out and I put their little faces on the document because I'm a cool boss. And I've been saying since this thing came out, Apple's weakest computer now is way overpowered for that type of work, which honestly is the type of work that a huge majority of the living, breathing American public does every day. My wife is a perfect example. She's the managing director, the second in charge of her company. Her collar is as white as they come, and she's perfectly content with an M2 MacBook Air. Can you even imagine? Which means, though this little Qualcomm-powered Windows on ARM laptop isn't as muscular as the M4, that doesn't matter for what it's designed to do. My wife using a Mac Studio would be like running Minecraft on an RTX 5090. It'd be like driving a Koenigsegg 1-to-1 on our suburban neighborhood roads. Let's talk about ARM real quick. I introduced these in a way that it just assumes everyone knows what ARM is, which is probably not the case, and that wasn't very nice. No one likes a gatekeeper of information. To tell the story of ARM, and feel free to skip ahead, I just like to inject some education or history into these videos, I'm gonna go back to the year 2020, or was it 2021? It doesn't matter for the context of this story. I'm also going to leave out a lot of the entire history of ARM holdings up until that point. Apple had finally released their heavily rumored Apple Silicon M1 line of chips, a processor somehow both requiring less than half as much power to achieve more than twice as much compute capability. It was like turning straw into gold. And I had one of the last Intel-based MacBook Pros, the 16-inch one with that little touch bar above the keyboard. I liked that touch bar, come at me. But I also remember that thing just being hot to the touch. Like, you couldn't work with it on your lap if you were doing anything intensive. And there was this one moment during the pandemic when this trade show had asked me to set up basically like a virtual TV show for them all to get on and do interviews. But that Intel Mac was pulling so much power by using OBS combined with a bunch of video streaming services to dress up and rebroadcast all of these industry people out to the internet. And my MacBook Pro was pulling more power than it was putting back in with its charger. I think I was using a MacBook Air charger at the time. And it was like the clock was ticking for that show to end before the battery died on my Mac and everything just went dark. Anyway, it all worked out, and that was a really long segue. I'm sorry. When you hear Apple Silicon, it's ARM. The same way you may have heard x86, which is Intel or AMD. Tim Cook says silicon. I've always said silicon. I don't know, Silicon Valley. At that time, in 2020, Apple switched away from using Intel chips and started making their own SoCs, with a CPU, GPU, and memory all on one little super efficient and yet somehow still faster package. First, it was just iPhones using the A series of Apple chips, but they found a way to make those chips powerful enough to go into computers, and that's the M series chips. Snapdragon has been doing the same thing. Those are the things that had been powering the iPhone's main competitors, the more premium Android phones. And those chips, which are ARM chips too, are now powerful enough to go into Windows computers. Now you're all caught up on ARM. Much more energy efficient, used to be slower, is now also fast. The Zenbook does, in my opinion, beat the Air in a few key areas, and Tim Cook should take notice and make some adjustments. And it's a little weird to directly compare a Windows computer to a Mac computer, because even if they're identical in every way, using Windows is just so massively different from using Mac OS. And learning a whole new operating system is a whole thing. But it's much less of a thing than it used to be. The Finder and the File Explorer work really similarly now. And once you're in whatever software you're using, it's largely the same, other than using a command key instead of a control key for keyboard shortcuts. But that whole thing with being part of an ecosystem plays into Macs so well. Like if you have a Mac laptop and an iPhone and an Apple Watch and an iPad and an Apple TV, they are ridiculously good at things like you can just get up from your desk and pick up your iPad without even hitting save and just pick up where you left off on whatever you were doing, at least with Apple applications. But I'm not comparing Windows to Mac, I'm comparing Zenbook to MacBook. I think probably the biggest, most notable place where Zenbook is in the lead is with battery life. Somehow, this computer is lighter than the MacBook Air, but can last way longer on a charge. Like, noticeably lighter. This is already really light. And not just a couple hours longer either. I'm talking like 10 hours longer. I don't understand it. Well, I do understand it, but I'm surprised by it. This has something like a 70 watt hour battery. This has something like a 50 watt hour battery. I can't figure out how they made it lighter. And the A14 does not feel chintzy. It's not flexible like a crappy laptop. They both pass that test I see people doing where you can open them without using your other hand to stabilize it. This computer's pretty rigid. The whole thing's made out of metal. They call it ceraluminum. It's their term for this hybrid aluminum composite mixed with ceramic. It does have a really nice, almost like stone-like finish to it. But because of the ceramic, the hardness is really high. And that works for both rigidity, but it also means you can be a little less careful with it and it won't scratch as easy. The hardness of a material is this specific quality that determines what will scratch what. Since coins and keys are generally made out of brass or something like brass, which is much less hard than this metal, I don't have any keys. I don't have any keys in my whole life. But whatever, you can toss this in a bag with a bunch of keys or a bunch of coins. Coins don't scratch it. Keys don't scratch it. That's one of its superpowers. So you can toss more random crap in your bag with this laptop and not worry about it getting scratched. Anyway, I was talking about battery life. From battery life to hardness of aluminum composites. It's a pretty good tangent. Where was I? Things the Zenbook is better at than the MacBook. 30+ hour battery life. It's hard to believe, really. Thing number 2 is Face ID. Obviously, Apple knows how to do Face ID. iPhones have been doing it for a long time now. But the laptops still make you use a finger. And I'm fine with a finger, but I'm finding that I'm a little happier unlocking this computer by just doing nothing, rather than that tiny movement up to touch the fingerprint scanner. We're into some real first world problems here, I know. But it's not just for logging on. One of their marketing points for this Zenbook A14 is their NPU, the Neural Processing Unit. And one of the things an NPU can do is facial recognition. But more importantly, through some kind of witchcraft, facial recognition that's always running to pay attention to when you stop paying attention to the laptop. And this gets into how this computer is pumping up its battery life. When you spend any amount of time not looking at this screen, the screen automatically dims down. Allow me to demonstrate. If I look over here at my script and I'm just not watching the screen, it dims down. And then when you look back at the screen, voila, it brightens back up just in time for you to focus on whatever you've gotten yourself distracted from. Because it's always watching. It's always watching. And dimming the screen saves a lot of battery. Also, the Zenbook has a full-sized HDMI port. And Apple, I know that component isn't very expensive. When I sit at a desk, I'm always plugged into a monitor and a keyboard. Oh, and speaking of keyboards, this, and let me remind you, lighter than the MacBook Air laptop, has a USB Type A port also. I don't understand why keyboards are still using USB Type A, but they sure are. With the MacBook Air, you just get the 2 USB-Cs and a MagSafe charging. Then again, that does bring up that in order to charge the Zenbook, you have to use one of the USB-Cs. There's gives and there's takes. Now, I don't mind one bit using a USB-C hub. This one has external storage built right into it, and a card reader on the front. There's a link in the description. A card reader is something I pretty much always want anyway, so USB-A ports and all these other ports are covered that way. But all these built-in ports do make the Zenbook a bit more handy for just plunking the laptop down next to a TV to stream an occasional show or something like that. Oh, and also, this has an OLED screen. HDR is crisp. It's 60 Hz, the same as the MacBook Air screen, though the Zenbook does have a lower resolution, 1920 by 1200 versus 2560 by 1664. And as far as my non-creative office job work stuff, and this will of course vary by user, but the company I work for does everything in Microsoft 365 apps, and that ecosystem is great at cross-platform. So it doesn't matter if I'm on my Mac or this Windows laptop. Emails, OneDrive for file sharing, Teams conversations and video calls, and then all my AutoCAD stuff is synced to OneDrive, so all those files are just in a cloud and they work everywhere. And I use Google Chrome for my internet presence, and Google is also really good about everything just popping up as long as you're signed into Chrome. So transitioning over to this thing was actually surprisingly seamless. I figured it would be kind of hard to set myself up in a Windows environment. That until I wanted to airdrop something from my phone. In case you've never used a Mac before, there's this feature where you can just like send something from your phone to your computer magically, even huge files, and it goes really fast. Oh, and I opened this thing up, and the SSD is right there out in the open. You can just swap that thing out, no problem at all. With the MacBook, the SSD is soldered onto the motherboard, and that is not accessible. What you buy it with is what you get. So that's what I like about the Zenbook. Now, what I like about the MacBook. These USB-C ports are Thunderbolt 4 ports instead of USB 4 ports on here. And I've got this Apple Studio display which only connects over Thunderbolt, no HDMI, which means I can't use this thing with the Zenbook. Though Thunderbolt 4 and USB 4 are the same 40 gigabits per second speed for things like external drives. The trackpad is actually really good on the Zenbook. It's super smooth, almost like glass, but not sticky like glass somehow. Coming from Macs, I almost never like a Windows trackpad, but this is the best one I've ever used other than, well, any Mac. I don't know what Apple does different. It's just better. You can click on it anywhere at all equally as easily. Apple actually has this like fake haptic feedback, so it's not a button you press down, it's just sensing the pressure. But that leads to like the click being just as good no matter if it's all the way in the corners or directly in the middle of the trackpad. And it recognizes the most subtle swiping gestures. I use this for video editing, and sideways scrolling on a timeline is just so nice with a Mac trackpad. The GPU in the M4 MacBook Air is simply much stronger. So even though this thing isn't necessarily meant for gaming, if you don't mind playing games on low graphics settings, this computer can play whatever modern AAA games exist on Mac. For me, right now, that's Cyberpunk 2077 and Assassin's Creed Shadows. Both will look like you're playing them on the Xbox 360 rather than a PS5, but importantly, they can get you through a long flight, and honestly, your brain sort of stops noticing the resolution after you've been playing for a little while, in my experience. I know some people are like 30 frames per second is unplayable, but when you're a middle-aged man like me, I learned video editing on Final Cut Pro, so I just know it way better. And the M4 Media Engine is an absolute colossus for just eating up 4K footage. The first time I edited on the MacBook Air, it was such a surprise. This can handle multicam footage with 3 4K camera angles, all at full resolution, no proxies. For Apple's weakest, cheapest computer to be able to do that is historically completely insane. I did download Resolve to test whether or not you can video edit on the Zenbook using H.265 footage, using Sony's XAVC-HS footage, which has historically been a difficult compression algorithm for Windows computers to edit on, at full resolution at least. Because this does have Snapdragon's equivalent to Apple's Media Engine. It does have a hardware video decoder encoder, and it's not nearly as smooth, but you can edit video on this, especially if you're just using one camera and not a whole lot of motion graphics, or really crazy complicated titles. If you're like a lifestyle YouTuber or a vlogger, this would be totally fine as a creator's laptop. That battery life. MacBook Air also has a special little chip designed just for pairing AirPods. So these totally work with the Zenbook, but unlike with the Zenbook, if I'm just arriving at the office and I've been listening to some podcast on my phone, as soon as I sit down at my computer and start a YouTube video, MacBook Air somehow gains this understanding of what I want to do and is able to switch the audio instantly over to the MacBook without me touching any settings. But then if I get a phone call and I pick up my phone and answer it, poof, the headphones just switch back to being connected to my phone. It's wildly seamless and just goes back to that Apple ecosystem thing where if you own everything Apple, having the MacBook ties it all together very neatly. And text messages. If you've always been a Windows user, you may not even know this, but MacBooks automatically always have all of your texts seamlessly and in real time synced up as long as you have an iPhone. So you can rattle off texts from your computer. I'm sure people on Windows probably just use WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger to the same effect. Or maybe there's an app and I just don't know about it. Where both of these ultra portables excel is that we've finally reached a point in CPU processing power where these relatively weak and efficient processors have no trade-offs at all for all the regular non-power user software. It always used to be that low-powered processors would be really laggy and unresponsive, even just in the system software and in the folders. These both feel super snappy and quick to open stuff. And back to my white-collar life, I'm not even sure I'd know which computer I'm using if you just sat me down at a desk with a monitor and a keyboard connected to one of these that already had Teams and Outlook, AutoCAD, Chrome, even Lightroom and Photoshop open. Like obviously switching between apps would be obvious. I can't use Command Tab on the Zenbook, but Alt Tab is the same thumb motion, just looks a little different. But anyway, they're all super responsive. You can edit AutoCAD, well, I only use 2D AutoCAD. I guess I don't know about 3D AutoCAD. And editing photos in Lightroom, not laggy. And I thought the Mac would destroy the Zenbook at RAM compression. These both have 16 gigs of RAM, but macOS is strangely good at RAM compression to where 16 gigs of RAM today feels really similar to what 32 gigs of RAM felt like in 2019. I opened all the same apps on both Lappy Toppies and they both handled it beautifully, honestly. We're talking about Outlook for Mail, Microsoft Teams, AutoCAD, a web browser, a bunch of windows open on the web browser. Even with Photoshop and Lightroom, all these things running, and it stayed well below the 16 gigabyte threshold. Both of these computers just start compressing RAM rather than using the swap, which is about 4 times faster. It's a little slower than not compressing RAM, so if you had 32 gigs of RAM, it would be faster, but when you straight up run out and it starts using your SSD as RAM, it's like 10 times slower. But anyway, it's great, and I would venture to say that 16 gigs of RAM for either of these computers is plenty. And if you personally need way more, you already know that. Both of these computers have no problem driving giant monitors, and even when you've got 2 4K displays hooked up, that doesn't cause a single bit of lagginess in whatever else you're doing on the computer. So you can jack into one of these 42-inch ultra-wide monitors and just keep everything open all at once. Be fully distracted with a movie playing, your message stream, your stock tickers, emails, and everything open, and AutoCAD will still feel just like it does if you were just using it alone on the laptop screen. They can both drive 2 4K external displays, and the Zenbook actually says it can do 3 on its documentation, but I don't have a third HDMI adapter, so I'll just take their word for it. So many monitors. Who uses this many monitors? Wow, that was a lot of words I said right now. I didn't really score these two laptops or say that you should get one over the other one, but that's just because I think that choice is super individual now. You might love Windows for some reason or need it to run certain apps. A lot of people hate Apple intrinsically just because it costs more. I don't know, I'm just trying to put out some data here. The MacBook Air is way more powerful, but if you don't play games or put a stopwatch to your exports, you might not even notice. Where the Zenbook's battery lasts a freaky 30 hours or so of casual use, meaning more than 2 full workdays of use in one charge. And it's lighter than the MacBook Air. Next week, I'm building a computer just for the game Anno 1800, and I've got this PCIe Gen 5 NVMe SSD. That was a lot of abbreviations, but it passes so much data and it runs so hot that it needs this as a cooler just for the hard drive. I know this is not a hard drive, this is an SSD. It needs a cooler this big just for the SSD, just to stop it from overheating. I'm pretty excited about that. See you later. Apple has a 3 nanometer process chip. Oh, I gotta do that again.